Welcome to Know Your Food, the podcast where we explore the world of food by speaking with farmers, makers, entrepreneurs, and experts who are reshaping how we think about what we eat. I'm your host, Michael Ray Robinoff, CEO and co-founder of Farm to People, and we're recording these conversations live from our warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn. In today's episode, I sit down with Simon Ziegler, co-founder of Sunsprout Farm based in Chester, New York. Simon shares what it takes to run a small farm today, from navigating unpredictable weather and labor shortages to finding viable markets and staying committed to organic practices. We talk about how Sunsprout Farm built a successful CSA program and wholesale business, the emotional and logistical toll of farming, and why supporting small farms is essential to building a more resilient food system. This conversation is honest, practical, and grounded in Simon's lived experience as a farmer trying to do things right. Thanks for tuning in to Know Your Food. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend and leave us a review. And now, here's my conversation with Simon Ziegler of Sunsprout Farm. I am a huge fan of yours, Simon. We buy a ton of your amazing produce, and I am personally a shopper for your produce in my own Farm to People box. So pleasure to have you on. And to kick us off, can you just tell us how you first got into farming and what inspired you to start Sunsprout Farm?
So farming, how did I get into farming? I guess I was always an outdoor boy, always liked to be outside. My mom always had to drag me back into the house in the evening when it was time to take a shower or eat something or go to bed. I always wanted to do something with my hands. As a child, I wasn't really interested in plants. My grandmother, she had a garden. I kind of, I noticed what she was doing, but I did not fall in love back then with plants. I liked hiking, I liked running, I was always outside. So I guess that laid the foundation for it. Also growing up, we used to go on, so I was born and raised in Germany. We used to go on vacation into the Swiss Alps, a lot of times like a farm, agri-tourism kind of thing, where you rent an apartment at a farm and milking cows, helping out. It was awesome. It was just, really the place where I felt comfortable. Looking back, I would have never thought I would end up on a farm, and here I am. Now I'm one of those upstate farmers that you guys have been talking about. We currently farm 100 acres of certified organic vegetables. Me and my wife, we started the farm about 10 years ago. Prior to that, it was just, one thing led to another, and graduating high school. And then back then, close to 20 years ago, we always said, well, you got to go out. You got to go to a different country. You got to do something before you go back to college. So I always wanted to go to the U.S. I was a big fan of the United States, always wanted to come here. I just randomly applied for several different jobs, and one of them was at a Camp Hill community in Pennsylvania, in Kimberton. And a Camp Hill community is a community for people with special needs. They're all communities, you can find those all around the world. And my oldest sister actually has a disability, and that's why I was kind of familiar with that kind of movement. I used to go to Waldorf school, which ties into that alternative education and worldview and even medicine or food,
farming. Biodynamic farming.
So all those things were gifted to me, and it took many years for me to actually realize what gift I have received and then kind of, made my own out of it. But yeah, so I moved to the US. It was a plan to just come here for 1 year, work here temporarily with people with special needs at a Camp Hill community. So self-sustaining living community. Once I got there, I was like, oh my God, this is like paradise. It's like right outside of Philadelphia, right by Valley Forge Park, self-sustaining community, just apple orchard, dairy farm. They had their vegetable CSA, their bakery, their woodworking shop, pottery. Every household on the property or that was part of the community was a household and a workshop, and just gave like meaningful work to people with special needs, which was just really important to me, due to my personal background with my oldest sister and just the family constellation that I grew up in. They had me work on the dairy farm. I got the letter that they offered me a job or a position at the dairy, and I was just like, dairy, what's that? I Googled dairy, translated to German. Well, okay, dairy, it's like yogurt, cheese, stuff like that. Like, are they going to have me work and make cheese or yogurt? I didn't quite understand, or because it didn't say dairy farm. So then I got there, and then they sent me down to the dairy farm. First day at the farm, totally loved it again. I was just in my element. And I realized, wow, farming is just amazing. And also seeing the difference of Germany, or in general Europe, and how it's developed and how densely it is actually populated, and then coming here to the US and seeing this vast majority, this land is just available, unfarmed, rolling hills. There's so much land and nobody around to use it. It was unbelievable. I even thought that about Pennsylvania, right? Even New York. But I mean, we are in the most densely populated state of the United States. And still, there's so much land available here and just huge potential. But then dairy farm, animals, I did it for 1 year. I met my wife there. We decided to stay for a second year. And that's how it all started. Then I decided I want to pursue this more professionally. Got a degree in organic agriculture science. My first semester, I was focused on animals. I wanted to have a dairy farm or a beef farm. Quickly, I realized in the first farm or ag economics class that farming, or especially livestock farming, is less profitable per acre than intensive vegetable farming. I did more studying and then shifted my focus more so on vegetables. So I have a degree in organic agriculture science, which really gave me a basic understanding of chemistry, soil science, biology, which helps me today in the field actually to understand what's happening in the ground or inside the plant much better than I would be able to understand it without that degree.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's crazy that you mentioned Waldorf School and Camp Hill.
Mm-hmm.
We just realized this about each other, but both Anina and I went to Waldorf School, and I went to a Camp Hill, so I know exactly. It is an ideal. And I went to the Kimberton.
Been to the same Camp Hill.
Same Camp Hill. The Waldorf School on the Upper East Side will send kids to both Hawthorne Valley Farm and also to the Kimberton Camp Hill, where you can see this sort of intentional living and self-sustaining community. It was incredible. I was curious. I had a question, and I'm going to jump right to it, which is, would you call yourself a biodynamic farmer? And because we're both from a Waldorf background, I think people see the biodynamic label maybe a lot on natural wine, maybe sometimes on food. Can you explain a little bit more what it means?
I'll try to, because I don't consider myself a biodynamic farmer, because I guess there are many approaches to agriculture. There's the conventional agriculture, which is, I would call, kind of somewhat, has almost no restrictions to what sort of inputs you can use. And then from there on, it becomes more defined, right? There's the IPM approach, integrated pest management, and then it becomes more and more strict from there. It's all voluntary, right? We restrict ourselves, so to speak, by being certified organic, and that we can't use certain tools that are available to other growers. My farm, we're only certified organic. The biodynamic approach, I'm aware of it. So the biodynamic agriculture focuses on or takes into consideration the stars, certain constellations we're in at certain times of the year. It has a planting calendar which tells you which days of the week are root days, leaf days, fruit days. So on a root day, ideally you would be seeding carrots and not a tomato, because a tomato is a fruit, so that you would ideally seed or transplant on a fruit day. The biodynamic agriculture also applies biodynamic preparations, which are mostly homemade, similar like tinctures or like sprays, right? They make themselves with various ingredients. And again, the process of making those preparations is also very specific. Only, on certain full moons or certain times of the year, and you harvest, the ingredients for it on certain times of the year. So it's very, very thought through and planned out, the whole process. I would consider myself a believer in it, but I don't practice biodynamic agriculture.
I think for many people it gets to a little bit of a level of maybe too spiritual, and I think that's maybe a reason that some people will be detractors of it. But I also think, and I want to focus, similar to you, I'm not a farmer, but we work with biodynamic farmers, and what's exciting about the biodynamic farming method to me is how it sort of relates to like the idea of regenerative farming. This idea that like all of the inputs and outputs are sort of like contained on a farm, and that sounds great. Like this idea that the waste from one section gets repurposed and used in others. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So that there's that, like you said, no waste, or you take into calculation what leaves the farm and you're trying to bring that back. Because obviously, growing anything, you extract something out of the soil, because out of a seed, you are able to grow a plant, and you're able to harvest fruit off of that plant, so that all that comes from somewhere, right? So there's something being pulled out of the ground that we're extracting. So there are different approaches. You know, the biodynamic agriculture has their approach of giving back or returning nutrients or energy that has been extracted out of the soil. What we practice is cover cropping, that we rest certain acres of our farm and we grow certain cover crops, primarily rest the soil, bring back organic matter, change the soil structure, ideally with the roots going down, breaking up the soil, improving drainage or accessibility to nutrients. And with a cover crop, we really don't take anything away. We grow a crop, which is mostly a grain, right? It could be like sorghum sudan grass or ryegrass, oats, peas, any kind of mix like that. And we seed it, we let it grow, we mow it in and till it back in and give it back to the soil. Because, soil is a non-renewable resource, and if we're too abusive, we certainly can deplete minerals and nutrients, and we have to be careful to give it back in a timely manner before it really gets to a bad
Totally.
level.
I think it's great that soil is now such a topic of conversation, but the way you phrased it is so beautiful that like when you plant a seed, there's many more things than that seed that happened to create a tomato or to create a potato or whatever it was.
Correct. Yeah.
And so when you think about soil health and the kind of, I guess, more restrictive methods that we use in conventional farming, like help people understand, I guess, also how this type of farming, or organic farming, regenerative farming, in some cases not what you practice, but biodynamic farming, how does that have like an impact on climate change in a more broad sense?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I'll try to answer most of them, or at least touch on them. We are certified organic, right? We are restricted in the use of certain materials. In our best interest is to keep the soil health balanced. It is in everyone's interest to keep your soil healthy and alive and well balanced, because the soil provides the ground to seed or plant our plants into, which we make a living off, and also provide local employees and many more people that depend on that income, which is a whole nother topic which we might be able to touch on. So we try to not abuse the soil. We try to give back to the soil in terms of cover cropping, also in terms of returning or leaving waste or harvest leftovers out in the field, which is a nice kind of side product. So we're not just extracting, we're also giving back. We're also, every time you till soil and you introduce oxygen into the soil, you release carbon out of the soil, which then obviously goes into the atmosphere. So we're trying to reduce our tillage to, just the minimal tillage that we actually need. Not as aggressive as we could go, but a little more shallow, a little more gentle, and only as needed. We try to keep the ground covered for most of the year, because if you look at nature doesn't like bare dirt. Wherever there is an empty lot, or even around like a tree out on the curb, or anywhere you go, nature always finds a way to populated with plants. It starts out maybe with the thistles and the dandelions or so on a construction site, and then from there it goes to little shrubs, and at some point, you can't even tell that there used to be an abandoned lot or a old parking lot or something like that. So we try to work with nature wherever possible and not against nature. We do to a certain extent because we grow crops in a way that nature would never grow a crop.
A row crop.
Right, in a straight row, a certain spacing at a certain time, only one crop, at a time, right? I mean, we grow, a large variety of vegetables. We plant scallions, then it's the next crop of fennel, then it's kohlrabi, then it's Swiss chard. It's not all mixed, which we just have to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to manage at all, or wouldn't even be able to keep track of our inventory. And every plant also has different needs. So we do group certain things by either plant family or other needs that the plant has. That could be the time to maturity, how long it takes from seed to harvest. We also organize or group our plants by, if it's a root vegetable or a leafy vegetable, if it needs to be trellised or not, if it can be grown on bare dirt, or if it prefers to have plastic mulch on the bed, which then has certain benefits of, that we can use drip irrigation, and with drip irrigation we use less water than overhead irrigation because we don't have the evaporation off of the ground, or at least we reduce that. We keep the soil warmer or cooler depending on what color plastic we use. And we make all that happen also thanks to, technology, and we're highly mechanized. We have to be at that scale, and we harvest most of our vegetables by hand, but the planting, the seeding, the cultivating, all that happens with equipment.
Yeah, totally. I think moving over to getting food to people, which is something that we work on with you, I think there's something that is really interesting in food accessibility, and I know I've talked to you about seasonality and even at markets. I know you do a lot of really awesome farm markets. Talk to everyone, about what it's like to be a upstate New York farmer with a growing season that is, at best 6 months at best, and what it's like. What?
Give or take.
Give or take. Maybe you get, climate is changing. Maybe you get 7. And I think also talk about what you're doing with greenhouses. I think this is really, really awesome. This is extending the season a bit on either direction, obviously also storage crops. But what's the perception of New Yorkers when they come to you and they want, a tomato in December, or they want a banana ever,
locally grown banana, Yeah, that is one of the biggest challenges, I guess, in general for the local food movement, that we need to do a lot of educating and just expose people to the local farming scene or environment. You can't blame someone who lives in a city like New York City that they don't know much about farming, because obviously if you never leave the city, if you're not, I know very little about computer programming or Wall Street. That's not my focus. I'm specializing in agriculture and farming, and I'm more than happy to share my knowledge. And one of the biggest challenges, like you said, is just that people have a limited awareness of seasonality. The season here in New York is fairly short. We start planting out into the field first week of April, and then we usually finish our outdoor season the last week of November, first week of December. So it's like December, January, February, March. There's really nothing happening outside. So that's 4 months. But then again, we have those shoulder seasons, and the shoulder season is late winter into the spring, and then late summer or late fall into the winter. So you're kind of like extending the seasons. We built several, now close to 4 acres of high tunnels. But the idea really is that by using greenhouses or high tunnels, we extend our growing season. So we can have seasonal produce longer on both ends of the season. So in the spring, we have, like right now, we're about a week or so out before we have our first field harvest, but we've been harvesting greens out of our greenhouses all winter already. January is a little bit challenging. The days are really short. January and February are usually the coldest months of the year. The weather pattern or climate is shifting in a way, or at least my personal observation is that we are having cooler springs, which is true again this year. So, and it's been really wet. So the combination of the wet, damp soil, cooler temperatures, then the nutrients are not available in the soil. The soil biology is less active, and therefore the plants grow much slower. And if it stays wet like this, we might see some symptoms of starvation in terms of that the soil is just saturated with water, doesn't have enough oxygen, and that the naturally available nutrients are not available. But then, season extension allows us to extend our season both ways. We have many of them. We're still building more every year. We can have greens into the winter, pretty much all winter. We'll soon have our first cherry tomatoes come out of the greenhouses. It's a fantastic way, especially up here in the Northeast, to allow us to grow more produce and bring produce to the market much earlier. And then in general, that shift, like I said, the spring has been a little cooler for the last at least 6 years, I would say. But then the fall has been extended and has been mild, which is actually not a bad thing in terms of in terms of marketing, because most markets perform really well towards the fall, and you might see the same
back
with
to
your
school.
business.
It's sort of, I think, a New York City
Exactly.
back to school thing.
Back to school, September, October,
and then you
November.
have Thanksgiving, which is the busiest week of the year.
So I don't mind that shift a little bit, that we have a warmer October and November, because it just means we can produce more that time of the year, bring it to market, and feed more people.
I think it's interesting too, because when you see these market shifts, I don't know if people, if people are asking for bananas, they're certainly not thinking about like, why am I seeing tomatoes into October when, some years I remember barely getting into September, or even melons. I think last year we had melons into September. Sometimes they stop mid-August. So definitely.
Right, geographically, we're in an interesting location here in New York, right? We have New Jersey, which is much warmer. Parts of New Jersey are at least 4 to 6 months ahead of us upstate. So you do get, a wide variation of produce that's available at any given time. We go to markets, farmers markets here in New York City and Westchester County, and at some of them we compete with New Jersey farms, and we're just like, did they buy it in or did they really grow it? But again, you're closer to the ocean. The whole microclimate in certain areas is just very different. With the buying in, that certainly happens as well. There's a lot of greenwashing going on, right? That like produce that is actually not produced locally is being sold as local.
Yeah.
I think, through educating people and having those kinds of conversations, and also then trying the food or cooking with it and eating it, I think you will most likely notice if it was produced locally or not. We're very proud of our location, of our soil, which is very unique. The black dirt here in New York State, I think it puts a lot of flavor into our produce. It grows very beautiful produce. So the black dirt is very rich in organic matter, but lacks some mineral contents. So compared to an upland soil, which is pretty much just ground up rock with a little bit of organic matter in it, we're like a lot of organic matter in it, because we used to be the bottom of a glacial lake. So that was about like 10,000 years ago when the glacier receded. It left behind wetlands, swamps, lakes, plants were growing up, falling back in, fish were dying, all that settles down to the bottom of the lake and just built this really thick, very fertile bottom of the lake. Then the landscape changed, the land was drained, drained itself naturally, and then was drained by some of the early settlers as well. And they made that land available. They noticed and knew that kind of land, the black dirt from Eastern Europe, and they started draining the land up here in upstate New York and made it accessible. And that's where we farm on nowadays, yeah.
I think that's like kind of because obviously there's a lot of human input right now that is expediting climate change in a negative way, but we also have to remember that climate change is a natural just sort of progression of the world, and that, the land that you're farming, in some ways, this climate change really did bring it to this sort of black dirt region. I want to segue into knowing the fertile nature of the ground, but also knowing what doesn't grow super well there. How do you decide what to grow each year, and how has that changed since you started?
Good question, yeah. The options are almost endless. If you get a seed catalog and you look through it, you're like, oh my God, that looks nice, this looks nice. Oh, wouldn't that be fun to grow this kind of crop? But then at some point, reality kicks in. You're like, well, what can I actually sell? Let me think. So before I started Sunsprout Farm, I worked in Connecticut at a farm. Before that, down in Pennsylvania. So I went and read all of Joel Salatin's books. We went to visit his farm. I think he mentioned Elliot Coleman in there, which is like an organic pioneer. Wendell Berry, all those things, all those books I have on my bookshelf now are, in part or thanks to Michael Pollan and his books that I just read, and that was really a good introduction and into the local food system. How do we decide, though, what to grow and what not to grow? So the market really dominates that decision. We grow certain things a little bit for fun, a little bit for color, a little bit to add some variety to it, but that's mostly for farmers markets. And I should also mention, so we grow vegetables on about 100 acres. We sell most of it through retail or direct to the customer at farmers markets, and then also wholesale. So that's about, in terms of income, that's about 50-50, pretty well balanced. Farmers markets, obviously retail selling to the end consumer, higher price but smaller volumes, right? We go to market with a full truck. We don't know how much we're really going to sell. It might be graduation week and everybody's out of town. It could be rain midday or so of the farmer's market day, and we lose 2 hours of sales, and the market is just shot. But then again, it works so well with wholesale. With wholesale, this morning we dropped off a delivery here. We're on the road 6 days a week now. Mostly leave at 3:30 in the morning and do our routes down here to New York City. Whatever's on the truck is already sold. It's usually larger quantities for a lower price, which, all in all makes sense. That's just how the markets work. So all the vegetables we grow about 50-50. And then we just have established relationships. So we know, we had just a conversation with Jack, the buyer here, and he was just like, Simon, you're my carrot guy. Okay, so I know, carrots, whatever carrots I can grow, I can sell them to you. We plan out the season a little bit in advance. I kind of have a sense of what might be, what you might be interested in. But both of us, I think, mutually also enjoy a little bit of flexibility, that we're not locked in, right? Week number 22 is coming up and you promised us radishes, where are the radishes? So both of us enjoy that flexibility. But again, the market really drives that decision. So, we live in New York State. We sell mostly to customers in Westchester County and New York City. So that already kind of steers us into a certain direction of what to grow.
I wanted to just ask about that flexibility, getting into that flexibility a little bit more. Is it that is missing from the more conventional channels that, again, the farmer's market, you're going to show up with whatever you have, but how can other direct-to-consumer models like Farm to People and consumers, actual consumers, people that are getting that food, I guess address the openness and the mindset of not everything is always available. Yeah. And to enjoy the diversity of what you're growing, because that's what makes sense. If I were just I need those radishes, and this is where people need, in my opinion, recipe flexibility, creativity in the kitchen. Yep. If you're just I need radishes, it's no fun. What I almost want, Simon, what should I be cooking this week? Yeah. What's delicious? What's coming out of the ground? How do we shift that? Because I think that's important, and what's working and what's not.
Right. I think it has to be a bigger shift than just changing our awareness of where our food is coming from, or just realizing what's in season or not in season. I think it has to be a bigger lifestyle change. Just personally speaking, we at home, we don't have a TV, and we spend that time that other people watch TV, we spend that time with our children, and we cook and socialize. So That's maybe one thing I would encourage everyone to do. You don't have to necessarily start out with locally sourced or grown produce, but just have friends over and share a meal. I think that's how you make real connections, and you just feel fulfilled afterwards. One reason as well why I probably started farming and why I stuck with it now, and now I'm committed, is because we do love food. We love to grow our own food. We love to cook it. We love to eat it. We just want to know where it's coming from, and also the standards that we set to our own farm or business with being certified organic, for example, it's just that wasn't driven by the market. That was driven by us because we want to grow the kind of food we want to eat ourselves. We want to see our children grow up in an environment that's safe. We want to provide a work environment to our employees that is safe, and those were all driving factors. But the seasonality, that's really hard to teach. It takes an interested mind and an open mind to find out about seasonality, especially the last couple of months. February, March into April, it's sometimes a struggle to think about something to cook, right? Because all you have is just, you still have potatoes, you still have beets, and you have carrots, for example. Maybe some storage radishes, but oh my God, the same root vegetables again. We go to the store as well at certain times of the year, right? But I think someone called it the brown phase of the year, where everything is brown, like the root vegetables. But thanks to our high tunnels and greenhouses, and we even grow pea shoots in large amounts, really, and sell them to a few of our customers. Simple things like that just make the winter much more enjoyable, and the winter goes by much quicker when you have good food and good company. And that would be my advice, to start cooking and turn off your TV or your devices and get together with some friends.
Totally. I think organic farming is important, not just for the end consumer. And eating sustainable food is obviously better for ourselves. We're not intaking the pesticides or whatever. But I just wanted to, you mentioned that about your workers, and I think it's crazy. I was listening to, cancer rates of workers that work on berry farms in California. They're much, much higher than anyone else who's not on those farms. And the only correlation is that their daily exposure to these pesticides is out of whack with what's acceptable, and it's showing up. Not to mention that it's trickling into the water supply and things, and possibly being intaken by livestock and the ripple effects of it. But I just think that the sort of side effect that we probably don't think about as consumers, who just care about ourselves, which makes sense. We care about what we're eating, what we're feeding our children, but also the livelihood of the people. So I just wanted to say that. To wrap up, we only have time for 2 more quick questions, but I wanted to ask you, what barriers exist for farmers that are trying to scale responsibly without compromising values? I know you didn't start with 100 acres. What does responsible scale look like? But obviously, I wish every acre of farmland in America could one day be, if it's not certified organic, at least practicing organic.
I think there's room for all of us. I don't blame my conventional neighbors or farmers in the state or in the country or anywhere. I mean, everybody has a reason why they do certain things, or locked into a certain avenue or sales channel, right, that demands a certain standard or a certain even quality. But in terms of responsible scaling up, so we started out with 13 acres in 2016. And have grown to 104 acres now in 2024. The growth has been, I would consider it kind of reasonable or slow. If you would probably ask other people, they would say that the last 8-9 years were a little crazy if you add 20-ish acres or so per year. But it was just a natural process. So at the end of every year, we just look back and we're like, we sold everything we grew. That's really amazing. It's a great feeling. It seems like we're doing the right thing. There's a demand for what we're growing and what we're offering, so let's do more next year, And then, it's like, at some point, I remember having a conversation. It was just like, from 13, let's say, at some point we'll do 20 acres. I think 20 acres is our sweet spot. And the 20 probably went to, 40, because then we can take some land out of production and rest it, and then grow maybe on 2/3 of it and rest 1/3 at any given time. But again, at the end of that year, we look back again and we sold everything. People keep calling and people keep demanding more of our stuff. So, okay, let's do more, And once you then even with our employees, once we, for some of our employees, we provide housing. So once we rent a house, you might as well fill up the house with workers, right? So instead of having 4 employees in there, well, now we have 9 employees in there. So it has been an organic growth. We're one of the larger farms in our area. There are other farms that might only do an acre or 2 and live a great life, right? They found their sweet spot. They found their work-life balance, right? And that's what they want to do. They have no ambition to be a 100-acre farm. Just different personalities, I guess, what kind of separates us. I mean, responsible growth is important. It has to, I feel like we're still growing into the size that we are. So, not everything in life always happens at the right time or at the right sequence. So, once land became available, we had to get on it and get the land. So sometimes you just have to make decisions or take...
Seize the moment.
Yeah, again, we don't work in a controlled environment. So every year is different. The climate or weather is very challenging. We're in a very agricultural area with a lot of potential, workers. So there's plenty of workers around. But sustainable growth, I mean, everybody has to have their own kind of expectations or standards that they want to abide by.
Well, it seems obvious that you, Simon, starting from being a rambunctious kid in Germany who couldn't wait to be, outside, to going to a Waldorf school, to going to Kimberton, to going to study agriculture in college, to making your way to a farm in Connecticut. There was looking back, an almost predetermined path to becoming a farmer. But we've talked before on this podcast about, young people wanting to get into farming and how there's not enough young farmers.
Right.
What needs to change to make that more realistic, and how can more people follow your path? I think that's a great way to potentially close.
Sure. So I think one thing came up, which I think earlier you mentioned something about maybe limiting factors or how to manage growth even. I mean, the land access is your first maybe limiting factor, because obviously unless we talk about hydroponic farming or rooftop farming or farming on abandoned lots, it's not for everyone, right? It's hard manual labor. It's physically very demanding. Long hours. We work out in nature, so if it's cold out, it's cold out. If it's sunny, it's windy, whatever it is, we're always out exposed to the elements. And again, like I mentioned, there's no controlled environment. So that is certainly not for everyone. I would love to see more young farmers. I feel like I know a decent amount of them, so I think there's hope, at least in densely populated areas like where we live, because the market potential is huge. We're so close to New York City. I think it's much easier for a young farmer to convince themselves that they might have a chance. I think it's much harder probably the further out you go, the further away you go from your markets and from larger populations. And also for us, I mean, just looking back, it was not easy. We started everything from scratch. So we did not inherit a family farm or land. Like everything that we own, everything that we purchased, everything that we built within the last 8-9 years, depending on when you start kind of counting. And I think there's hope. I think there will be the next generation of farmers, I think, is already out in the field and is already growing. And lots of people that I talk to, my age, I mean, they're interested. We have a good group here tonight. And I think it's a, grassroots movement, which is actually growing to be at some point a mainstream movement. And I think we're on the way. I have hopes. It sounds depressing, right? The average age is 65. That is quite old to be farming and not have a plan, of how to pass it on or what to do with it further down the road. Because food, obviously, we all have to eat. We all need food, ideally, nutrient-dense food. And that's, I think, very important for society, for national security, for all of us, to make sure that our food system is secure and resilient in a way that we have the next generation lined up and ready to go.
Completely agree. I like that you even bring it up to national security. I think it's important that we focus so much, and you see it now more than ever with like tariffs, but this idea of like importing and exporting like such vast amounts of food, and we prioritize commodities over like food that people eat, like whether it's crops for energy or crops for animal feed.
Yeah.
Like it seems like the priorities aren't around human health and human consumption.
Correct. Yeah.
How do we start to change that? And it's great to hear that there's hope like locally around bigger cities. I think now we have to build that demand, and in my line of work, the logistic capabilities around bringing that food from not further in the sense of like thousands of miles, but hundreds of miles, and creating more of a rural support system, I guess, that gives opportunities to small farmers to have a market. Ultimately, like you mentioned, I think it's tying it back to you're growing what the market wants, and that we can't forget that. You might have a little fun
certain
here and
things,
there.
Right, we push certain crops on people, but the majority, is what the customer demands. And I also wanted to mention, I'm sure everybody has had an awakening like this before. Like if you eat good food, you just feel good afterwards.
Yeah.
Right? And if you kind of eat trashy food, you don't feel that great. It's still food, there's still nutrients in there, but it's just a greasy pizza versus some like broccoli rabe with like, some pasta or something. It's just like, it's very different. I think, food, I certainly look at food as being medicine, and that it's just, you can feel it if you eat vine ripened, for example, a tomato, right? Or if the tomato was ripe, harvested green and then ripened in a chamber full of ripening gas. It's just stuff like that is, to us, seems pretty obvious now that we have refined our taste buds and that we can actually pick out the flavor of a locally produced, or it doesn't have to be local, but even a fruit that was produced in its right season. Even in the middle of the winter, we get some strawberries from Florida. They're amazing, but it's strawberry season in Florida at that time, and they just taste great. So we just have to change our eating habits a little bit, maybe eat a little less sometimes, and be a little more aware of what's going in and where it's coming from and how to prepare it.
Totally. This was not supposed to come up, but I just think it's great. We do crop plan a little bit with you. One of the things I would love to create a market for, because you do cover cropping and other folks do cover cropping as well, is an outlet for those cover crops to be harvested and mixed in with your salad greens. And I've seen other people trying to promote this idea, but want to bring it up, and maybe we do a cover crop salad mix with you. But I think that's an idea of you're taking a part of your land, you're leaving it fallow, you're regenerating it, but you're not necessarily creating a cash crop, and that can be a financial burden on many farms. And I just wanted to kind of put that in the ether.
And unfortunately, you mentioned something very interesting with the cash flow or cash crop. I mean, that's probably why most of the land is being depleted or abused the way it currently is, because the profit margins are very slim. There's in theory, we all know what to give back and how to treat nature and how to let it rest, and but in reality, once it comes down to cash flow and income and making a living, I'm sure that's a lot of times the driving factor why land is treated the way it is, just because bottom line, the finances, or you just need to push another crop out of it.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I could talk to you all day and all night, but I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Simon, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to Know Your Food, a podcast from Farm to People. If today's conversation got you thinking differently about what's on your plate or where it comes from, we'd love if you shared this episode with a friend or left us a review. It helps more people discover the folks reimagining the future of food from the ground up. And if you're in the New York tri-state area, you can shop from our network of small, regenerative, independent farms and makers at farmtopeople.com, and stay in the loop by signing up for our newsletter or joining us on Instagram at farmtopeople. Until next time, eat well and know your food.